Hi everybody, this is Megan Garza with Megan Garza Wellness. I'm a nutritional therapy practitioner, health coach, and yoga instructor, and you're listening to the Restoring Balance podcast. More women than ever are now dealing with digestive, hormonal, and skin issues and are not finding satisfactory answers or results. On this show, I teach you how to implement holistic lifestyle, dietary, and mindset strategies to help you get smooth digestion and balanced hormones to reclaim your health, feel confident about your decisions, and to finally live life on your terms. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the podcast. This is episode 25, and the title of today's episode is Water Filtration. Before we get into today's episode, if you're a fan of the show, this is just a reminder of how you can support the podcast by giving it a 5-star rating on Spotify or Apple Podcast, which helps my show get to other people who would benefit from it just like you. Also, if you want to learn more about how to improve your digestion for better bowel movements and reduce your gas, bloating, food sensitivities, and constipation, I have a free webinar on the foundations of digestive health that's full of practical information that utilizes nutrition, lifestyle, and mindset strategies as a root cause approach. So if you want to optimize your digestive health, be sure to check it out. You won't want to miss it. I'll link it below in the show notes. So without further ado, let's dive in. The main topics that I'm going to be discussing are the dangers of tap water and drinking it, the risks of the chemicals that are found in the tap water, how to avoid it, and some of the hidden sources of it and what the best filters are. First and foremost, where does tap water come from? Tap water is ultimately recycled toilet water, which isn't necessarily a bad thing because when you think about it, all the water in the world has been drank by somebody at some point. It goes up into the clouds and it precipitates and we filter that water out. But the issue of where tap water comes from is the fact that water treatment facilities do not filter out a lot of the chemicals that are commonly found in the water that they are using. And one of the main chemicals that you are going to be exposed to, or chemicals, it's a huge umbrella, is heavy metals. So mainly the fact that pipes are made out of lead because they were put in at a time when there wasn't a whole lot of research or knowledge about the exposures and danger of lead. And what happens here is that they've added an anti-corrosion layer to these pipes on the inside. And while that sounds like a good thing, we're protecting people from this lead that's in there, unfortunately, a lot of this can chip off because of vibrations in the ground and movements and just various other factors. And when those lead chips come off, it's going to expose the water drinker to a very high amount of lead. So not only did the anti-corrosion layer that was added not necessarily protect people like they said it was, it's actually exposing people who are drinking tap water to a seriously high amount of lead. Think back to what happened to Flint, Michigan about a decade ago and how bad of a crisis that was. And that really goes to show you just how dangerous lead is. And when you are drinking small amounts of lead here and there, it's going to add up and your body is not going to be able to filter these things out. It's going to be stored in your body in various organs in various places, which is why the issue of lead and tap water go hand in hand. The other chemical that a lot of people are exposed to is fluoride. So originally fluoride was added into the water supply to minimize tooth decay, and there were no empirical studies to back any of this up. And, when you think about it, fluoride is used as a topical treatment, and here I'm not advocating for it or anything, but just thinking of the broader picture here, so fluoride is added as a topical treatment to be either left on or used as a toothpaste, and you ultimately spit it out. The amount of time that the fluoride is on your teeth when you drink water is significantly less. So you are just ingesting it. It's going into your stomach, into your body to do God knows what, wreak havoc on your whole system, and not even stay in your mouth long enough for it to have the quote unquote benefits that they are claiming it has. And where does this fluoride even come from? During the production of aluminum, it will actually create a byproduct called sodium fluoride. So it's man-made, it's not something that is naturally occurring, you cannot find it anywhere in nature, and this is what they have added into the drinking water. So it's essentially a waste product, and they were not really sure how to get rid of it, so they came up with all these campaigns and these slogans and just this huge push to add fluoride to the water without any clinical studies to show the efficacy of it, and it still went through, and it's still being added to tap water to this day. Not only is it found in tap water, but it's found in toothpaste, in table salt, and so many other places that we are being exposed to without even knowing. Fluoride damages the thyroid, and it can cause skeletal fluorosis. Skeletal fluorosis is where you ingest too much fluoride, and it actually damages and weakens the bones, so it's very counterintuitive to what they're trying to do. And it can also cause low IQ in children. So adding fluoride to the tap water is really not based on any medical knowledge. And this is why it is so important for you to not drink tap water. I'm obviously going to get into more nuances of the other chemicals that are added into tap water, but just the fact that there is fluoride in it is enough to really turn you off from it. Now, you might be thinking, well, they added fluoride to the water, and didn't that reduce tooth decay? And not necessarily, and it's not really for the interest of the public's health, because when does the government really do anything for our health? When do they ever really care about us? So there's a whole lot more to tooth decay than just simply drinking fluoridated water and brushing with fluoridated toothpaste. So a lot of tooth decay and just tooth health in general has to do with your gut health, the food that you eat, making sure that you're getting adequate nutrients, especially things like vitamin D3 and K2, and so much more. In episode 20 of my podcast, I talk all about oral health and some of the ways that you can improve your oral health, some of the pitfalls of what we do wrong with oral health, and gut health really is paramount for tooth and bone health. And I talk about this in depth in my webinar. So if you have not watched my webinar, go check that out, because there's this very strong link between gut health and bone health. So if this is something that you are struggling with, I will put that in the show notes for you to watch. And if you use fluoridated toothpaste, you might think, okay, well, what am I supposed to do? Am I just supposed to not use any fluoride? Then I'm not going to have any protection from cavities. And that's not necessarily true, because there are wonderful alternatives on the market today, like nanohydroxyapatite. I personally use Berkey toothpaste. I talked about this on my Instagram and how I reversed a couple of cavities, and I say that word reverse in quotation marks because there really is no such thing as a reversal of cavities. But if you want to check that story out, it is in my highlights on my Instagram at Megan Garza Wellness. And I show photos of the before and after I used the toothpaste and did some other things that you will see in the story. So if you are struggling with cavities, please check that out. And if you are still not convinced that fluoride being added to water is unhealthy because it's promoted by doctors, just remember that there was a time when doctors also promoted smoking cigarettes, and the government has also told us that things like DDT and Agent Orange were harmless, and this is all just junk science that is deeply rooted in corruption. So really keep that in mind and look at these things with a critical mind when you are approaching them. The next chemical that is found in tap water, or shall I say chemicals, is PFAS. So these are found in nonstick pans, in firefighting foam, furniture, and basically everywhere else that we are exposed to. And these do not break down in the body. They stay there. They are known as forever chemicals. It is a huge public health issue that we are not made aware about in the mainstream media, and I think that is very unfortunate because of how big of an issue this truly is. So companies like DuPont and 3M are really the major contributors to the amount of PFAS that we are seeing in our environment, in our water supply, and just the overall pollution. Because back in the day, they would just dump the PFAS wherever they wanted to, or they would burn it. And I'm sure that they're probably still doing this stuff. I do not doubt it by any means. And what is happening with these PFAS in all of the things that we use, like the carpet that we stand on, the clothes that we wear, the nonstick pans that we use, all of these contain PFAS and they are being leached into the water supply. When you throw that pan away, where is it going? It is breaking down in a landfill, it is going back down into the earth, and it is ultimately ending up in our water supply again. And the major issues with PFAS is the fact that there are thousands of chemicals that are basically PFAS, and they can cause cancer, they are endocrine disruptors, they are causing problems with obesity, with heart attacks, cardiovascular disease, and just so much more. If you've never heard of PFAS, I highly encourage you to do some research about them. And I mean, it's like a whole rabbit hole and it can feel very overwhelming, but just being informed about this is what is going to help move us in the right direction. Because if we don't know about these things and we don't ask for something better from our government to actually put regulations on this stuff, nothing is going to change. But fortunately for us, the EPA is now finally doing something about PFAS contamination in the water. So according to the EPA, they are taking a signature step to protect public health by establishing legally enforceable levels for several PFAS known to occur individually and as mixtures in drinking water. So it sounds like they're on the right track, but the fact that they threw in the language several PFAS rather than just PFAS in general and not actually attacking the companies and brands that are using these chemicals is kind of where the corruption lies. We'll see how all of this plays out and we'll see how much change actually occurs from this, but it's a good step. We're bringing awareness to it and people are starting to understand things better about what's actually going on. But the fact that they really are not addressing the core issue of where are they coming from is kind of like putting a Band-Aid on a bucket with like 15 holes in it and then just expecting the problem to get better. And another issue with that is the fact that water utility companies can also decide to only report favorable results. Those with lower toxicity, they can basically make it look like the results are going to appear more favorable and that the water is actually cleaner than it truly is. So really just relying on a company and a government entity to just say, yeah, everything's all good, you're safe. It's kind of asinine and it's kind of foolish because they really don't have our best interest at heart, unfortunately. So that's why we really have to take these extra steps to protect ourselves. The next chemical that we are exposed to in tap water is chlorine. So first, chlorine was added to tap water because there was a lot of people dying from terrible bacteria that were added to the water unintentionally. And this chlorine was added. And at first people were like, no, we don't want to drink this. Like, what is this? I don't want to put this in my body. But, deaths started going down. And eventually everyone just kind of rolled over and said, okay, well, I guess this is how it's going to be. So that is how the story of chlorine was added to the water and how people just kind of were okay with it over time. And now it's just been commonplace to know that chlorine is in tap water. And this is why people boil their water before they drink it. But also boiling tap water is not enough because while it will get rid of the chlorine, it's not going to get rid of all of the other chemicals that are present in tap water. And a really bad thing about chlorine is that it negatively impacts the gut microbiome. So if you're drinking tap water constantly and you're trying to repair your gut, you are going to be inundating it with all kinds of stuff and especially chlorine. So this is definitely not something that you want to be doing on a regular basis or even at all if you can avoid it. And lastly, we have prescription drugs that are also found in tap water. Of course, the prescription drugs are not intentionally added to the water, like the same as PFAS. They are not intentionally added, but they are there because removing prescription drugs from tap water at these water facilities is just something that they do not have the capabilities to do on a massive scale. So everything that is being urinated out into the toilet, like birth control, antibiotics, antidepressants, and basically any other drug is going to be ending up in your tap water that you are drinking because they are not being filtered out. And this is really crazy because Americans take a lot of drugs. Around 60% of people over the age of 18 take at least one prescription drug, which is a lot. I mean, you think about how many people are out there in America. It's the population somewhere around 300 million people. That's over 175 million people taking prescription drugs, going to the bathroom, flushing that down the toilet, and then it is ending up in our water supply. So this is why it's so important to be really mindful of what we are consuming and really just avoiding tap water in general. And lastly, one thing that I do want to note is that your chemical exposure in tap water also depends on where you live. There are a ton of variables that go into this depending on what your city adds into the water, like fluoride, how much chlorine they have, where the water is coming from. So there's a lot of different factors that you have to take into consideration. I'll put a couple links down in the show notes so that way you can see exactly what your exposure is. There's a couple charts that I found about your PFAS exposure and other contaminants that are commonly found in the water. Also looking up your municipal water supply on the county website can also be really informative to what is in the water. But some places are going to have more exposure to PFAS or to other chemicals just depending on certain circumstances. Like if you are close to industrial agriculture, all of that runoff is going to end up in the groundwater. Or if you're near a military base, you're going to have more exposure to PFAS. So just things like that are something to really consider and to be mindful of. And that also goes for well water, because you might think that just because you're on a well or an aquifer or you're near a spring that you're safe, but you also have to remember the issue of runoff and agriculture and PFAS and just other stuff that ends up in the atmosphere and gets rained down is going to end up in that water and in the groundwater underneath us. So just because you live on a well, that does not mean that you cannot filter your water, because you absolutely should be. Okay, so what about bottled water? Is bottled water any safer? You can just go to the store and pick it up and everything's good to go. Well, not quite, because bottled water has microplastics, which are plastics that are very, very teeny tiny. You can only see them with a microscope, and they end up in your body. They've been found in human hearts, in human lungs, and they can wreak havoc on our bodies because they are foreign objects. They contain a lot of contaminants, and they just disrupt the system as a whole, which is one of the reasons why bottled water is not any better. And unfortunately, I hate to break it to you, but bottled water is really just glorified, overpriced tap water. They use the same process to make bottled water as they do tap water. So it still contains all the junk like PFAS and pharmaceuticals and heavy metals and just other things that are not filtered out. So in a way, it's kind of just stealing your money. And my final note about bottled water is the fact that they do not use BPA anymore, which is the chemical found in plastic, but they use BPS, which is pretty much the same thing, and it has the same effect on the body. Also, phthalates are found in plastic water bottles, and during the transport process, when it's being loaded onto trucks or onto airplanes, when it's sitting in the hot sun, on the tarmac, in the back of a truck, that heat is going to cause more chemicals from the plastic to leach into the bottled water. So this transport process is actually making your water a lot more toxic, unfortunately, which is a really scary thing to think about. And then you might have some people say the argument like, oh, I've drank tap water my whole life and I'm fine, but they're on a bunch of different pills. They're on pills for their thyroid or this or that. Or even if they are not experiencing health problems right now, later down the line, they could very well be experiencing health problems. So these chemicals that you're ingesting also might not affect you, but it can show up for their children or even their grandchildren. So what you are doing today impacts future generations of your offspring. So that's really it for drinking water. I'm going to move on to showering, because that's also something that I wanted to very briefly touch on because of just how important it is. So your skin absorbs chlorine and other chemicals way faster than ingesting it. which is why having a shower head filter is vital for your health, because you think about how much you are showering and getting in the water, putting this on your skin. Same thing with health and beauty products. I have an entire podcast episode on environmental toxins and what products that you should not be using and why you shouldn't be using these things. So check that out. I will link it in the show notes. But these chemicals in the water, you are not safe from them if you are showering, if you are taking a bath. And there are certain filters that you can use that I will talk about in just a moment that help with that process. So especially if you're dealing with things like eczema or psoriasis or just dry skin or kind of gritty hair, just these things that we chalk up to, just it's not a good conditioner that I have, or whatever the case may be, it very well could be your water. Now, moving on to water testing. This is something that is critical to be able to understand what is in your water, so that way you know what contaminants you should be filtering out. The EWG.org has a free analysis of your water based on zip code. I believe that this is only for tap water, so if you live on a private well or something like that, it's not going to be able to give you any real information about what you're dealing with. But if you are on tap water, it gives you a pretty decent analysis for where you live and what contaminants your water has in it. Another great option that I highly recommend is mytapscore.com. And this is going to include things like a basic test to an extremely comprehensive test for phthalates, PFAS, heavy metals, VOCs, pesticides, and everything in between, which is for the well water, the one that I looked at, it has over 355 analytes that are being tested with this one. So it really depends on what chemicals and what contaminants that you want to search for and to analyze in the water, and also what your budget is, because the more basic tests can be a little bit under $200, and the really comprehensive one can run you into the thousands. So it really depends on what your budget is and what you are searching for and how concerned you are. And once again, like I said, just because you live on an aquifer or a spring, that does not matter, because water pollution is everywhere and it must be analyzed in some way and it has to be filtered. So this is really just the unfortunate reality that we live in, and we kind of just have to go with it and to take our licks and to make the best of it. But fortunately, we also do have testing and filters for these kinds of things, so that way we know what we're working with rather than just taking a guess at it. Now, on to what are some of the best filters. Some of the best filters for drinking water would be the Berkey filter. This is something that I personally use because of where I live. I don't need to filter out any fluoride. I know there's been some controversy about the fluoride removal filters that they have, but you can really do your own research and to see what you come up with, what you are comfortable with. But the Berkey has been the best thing that I've found for water filtration. I cook with the water, I drink it, I give it to my dog, and everything has been wonderful with it. I have not had any weird taste with the water. It has been tested to be very clean. It filters out so many different contaminants, which is why I personally love the Berkey. I am not sponsored by them in any way. I'm not even an affiliate with them at the moment, but they are a company that I really like and I trust them a lot. If you don't want to have a Berkey, another option would be to have an above or below sink reverse osmosis. The only pitfall with these is that it strips everything out, including the necessary minerals for your health. So you're going to have to remineralize that water either with sea salt and or electrolytes, because if you are just drinking plain water like this, it is going to deplete your body, it's going to dehydrate you, and you are not going to get the necessary minerals and electrolytes that your body requires to function optimally. As far as the shower goes, you can find some cheaper shower head filters on Amazon. Some of those are not super great because they haven't been tested. Some of them people have claimed that they put heavy metals back into the water or that it just doesn't do anything, which is really a huge waste of money and just disappointing in general. But one that I found that I have not personally used, but I have seen wonderful reviews on it, is the Ultimate Dual KDF shower head filter. And what the really cool thing about this is it really does filter out a ton of contaminants. It actually does what it's supposed to do, what they claim it does, which is fantastic. As far as the bathtub go, there is a little basket that you put underneath the faucet, and it helps remove the chlorine and other chemicals that are found in bath water. So if you or your kids have issues with like eczema or even dry skin after a bath, give that a shot, because there have been a lot of people who have claimed that it really helps them out a ton. And then lastly, one of the best options would be to get a whole house water filtration system. So these can be very expensive. They can run anywhere from $2,000 to $10,000 and probably even more, really depending on what you're looking at, what you're trying to filter out, and what your goals are. So this is not an option for everybody, of course, but if you have this option and you want to go for it, go ahead and go for it, because this is really the safest option to help filter out all the water in the house, especially if you like to put water out for your dogs and you use the faucet outside. This is something that can be really helpful for them, because they won't be drinking any contaminants that are found in the tap water or in the well water or whatever water you are using that is not filtered. Again, whatever kind of whole house water filtration system you're using depends on what your goals are, what your budget is. So there are plenty of options out there. Some are more salt-based, some are not. So just make sure that you are really doing your research when you are looking into this stuff, making sure that the filter system for the whole house is everything that you want, because this is a really big investment and it's not something that you can, just take out and say, oh, well, try again. And for all of these filter systems, whether it be drinking water, shower water, bath water, whole house, whatever the case may be, when in doubt, explicitly ask for the full report of what these companies filter out and what their end results are. And make sure that you ask about third-party testing to be sure that the results are accurate and not skewed by the company for some kind of underlying financial incentive. And lastly, just some general tips to avoid tap water. So making sure that you're trying to avoid any prepackaged foods or liquids that have water listed as the main ingredient, because you don't know what the source of this water is and if it's been filtered properly. So this is especially common with things like nut milks and just other things that have a ton of water in them. If you are eating these things on a regular basis or drinking them, you have no idea what is in that water, and you don't know what it's doing to your body and the effect that it's going to be having. So if you can make it yourself with your own filtered water, do that, because that's a much better option. Make sure that you are filtering your water properly to drink it using a high quality water filter. Get a shower head for your water filter, get a filter for your bathtub, and lastly, do not cook with unfiltered water, because this is something that I see a lot of people doing and they are not really thinking about it. They think that just because the water's boiling that it's totally fine, but you ultimately want to be cooking with filtered water because you know that it is safe and that it is clean to eat and drink. So that is pretty much it. That wraps up the entire episode. I really hope that you enjoyed, and if you did, be sure to share it with somebody who drinks tap water to help them understand why it is so harmful and that they should stop. So just remember to take it step by step and to keep learning on your wonderful journey of wellness. Well, that's all the time that we have for. Thank you so much for tuning into this week's episode. Today we talked about tap water dangers, some of the chemicals that are commonly found in tap water, and the best filters. You can expect new episodes every Wednesday at 12 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Just a quick reminder again of how you can support the podcast and stay in the loop. You can sign up for my newsletter so that way you can be notified every time I post a new podcast episode, make any new announcements about my services and how you can work with me, and also receive weekly relevant tips for digestion and hormones so you can optimize your health. You can find the link to sign up for my newsletter in the show notes, or head to my website at Megan Garza Wellness, and you can wait for the pop-up or sign up under the freebies tab. Again, I just want to thank you for listening to this week's topic. Take care, everyone, and until next time.